for tuning in for another episode of the Nice Doing Business with You podcast. In this interview, I had the pleasure of sitting down with Scott Ward, who is the founder of HabitStack. He's a strategy and execution coach for leadership teams who want to improve and elevate their focus. His program includes weekly facilitation, constructive accountability, and a simple alignment system using some software that he developed himself. Scott has a degree in philosophy, but after attending college, he switched into the field of software development, then eventually into business coaching in 2009, where later, when he formed HabitStack, all of his past experience came together in a really interesting way. He's an expert in the areas of building leadership teams, goal setting, strategy execution, accountability, and habit formation. He's helped teams achieve over 35,000 business goals to date, and his goal in life right now is to help business leaders rise above the tyranny of the urgent and build the habit of making the important things happen consistently. So I hope you enjoy this episode, and thanks again for tuning in to the Doing Business with You podcast. Scott Ward, thanks for being with me on the Nice Doing Business with You podcast. I want to welcome you today. I was hoping we could just kind of dive right in if you want to tell us a little bit about your background and how you got into a combination of software development and coaching.
Yeah, Chris, well, it's good to be here. I appreciate you having me on the show. It's always nice to connect with people doing interesting things like yourself. So the question is my background. Yeah, I started out in software development, like you referenced. And what I usually say is that I realized that although I really liked computers, I liked people slightly more. Not a lot more, just slightly more, And, honestly, it changes sometimes depending on the day. But today, because I'm talking to you, Chris, I like people more. I was in software and then realized that I've always liked business, I always liked people. And so getting into coaching and consulting was a way for me to kind of balance a little bit more towards people. Being an engineering type person, I couldn't help but develop some software along the way which is something that we've been working on over the last 10 years, actually, which is a core part of what we do around goal setting and execution, setting habits around goal setting. So, um, I don't know how far back you want to go, but my degree is in philosophy. So, that was a very lucrative option too. I could have kept using that degree, but I decided to go into computers and business. And even though, that's a joke. It was not
I was catching what you were throwing there. I assumed it was a joke. So there's no opportunities to develop software for philosophers.
I actually think that humanities degrees are very valuable. I might be in the minority these days, but I do think that I use my philosophy degree every day, including as we work on our software, but particularly
That makes
but
sense.
also with people. And so, yeah, I think it's a really fundamental. Education is worth it, even though it's expensive.
So after the college degree in philosophy, where was that kind of segue into software? How'd that happen? I mean, you obviously
Oh, well,
don't learn
I
software
actually,
skills in college when you're studying philosophy.
I
So,
was in computers before. And
okay.
I started in computer science and somewhat arrogantly decided, I'll just keep teaching myself this stuff. I'm not learning as much as I do on my own. I'll do something that's more difficult to replicate, which is a classroom discussions around philosophy are, not something that happens necessarily in after university as much. But I was always the plan, actually. I was always going to go into computers. So
Okay.
after, yeah.
So did you start developing software like as an employee for other companies and then started doing it for yourself, or how did that happen?
We were doing websites and CGI scripts. I don't know if you remember CGI scripts, but in high school, I was putting ourselves out there as, I can't remember the name of it now, but my buddy and I made a website and started selling our services in high school. So we were, and then, writing, I've discovered QBasic, actually GW Basic, I think, and it's like, man, this is incredible. You could just write this stuff and make circles go around on the screen. And, it was pretty cool. So
Yeah.
it was early
The,
on.
the kids these days are a little less excited about circles going around on the screen
Yeah.
as we were.
I
That
don't
was
know. I don't
fascinating.
know. Like I have this, I remember clearly my buddies were watching a movie and I had discovered that my friend's computer had QBasic on it. So I was playing around with programming while they were watching this movie. I figured out how to draw a circle and I figured out how to do a loop, but then I was like, how do I make it move? And so I said, well, maybe I could do like x equals x plus 1 and then loop and then
Yeah.
draw the circle over and over. I was
Right.
like, but
Right.
that definitely won't work because x doesn't equal x plus 1.
I think I have the book on my bookshelf over there, but my intro to programming class, we had to make a game. I think it was, don't quote me on this. I want to say it might have been with C sharp, but I could be wrong. But it was like a snake game kind of thing
Yeah.
where like this
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
snake, you didn't want the snake to eat itself, and every
Yeah.
time it,
Yeah.
swallowed a thing, it got a little bit longer. Just designing the graphical user interface for that and trying to make it work. Like each time you figure out, and of course you're kind of following along, right? Like you're not building this from scratch. It's for a class. They're teaching you the concepts, and you're taking little bits of code and understanding how they work and plugging them in and kind of building the game. But it's already kind of built for you, right? Like, just let's be honest, you're not building
Yeah.
it from
Yeah.
scratch. But it's kind
But
of
I put in,
fascinating. Like,
I put in x equals x plus 1, thinking that it was going to error out because like that actually isn't true. That the x
right,
does not equal x plus 1, and I hit F5 or whatever it was, and the circle went across the screen. I just about fell out of my chair. It's like, wow, look what I did. This is amazing.
like you invented water for the first time.
Yeah, so I guess the reason I bring that up is just you said the kids wouldn't be impressed, and I think that maybe that I know what you're saying, but at the same time, there is something magical about exploration and learning something, even if super. I mean, a circle going across the screen was trivial at the time too. It was like there were games, so it is interesting to think about how that experience will be impacted in the current environment with AI coding and things like that. I haven't thought about that, if there's a path to that same kind of discovery. But maybe, or maybe it's even better. I don't know. I'll have to think about it.
Yeah, well, we just keep building on a solid foundation, right? Like you got more compute power. The AI is really writing a lot of the code for you these days. So
Yeah.
just still coming up with the unique ideas and putting new twists and spins on it, I think is the name of the game more than ever before. So you're, kind of introduced it a little bit when I introduced you, but how did you go from, I think we talked about philosophy to, you had this natural fascination and affinity towards coding and software. Your current business, HabitStack, well, fill in those gaps for me for, how I'm always fascinated with the journey. I found like so many entrepreneurs and founders never thought they'd be a business owner someday. So like, how did you go from college student with your high school buddy dabbling with building web pages to now owning and growing a software company? What were those steps in between college and launching HabitStack?
Yeah. So after college, I went into a software development job, and um, I enjoyed that. But I did realize that I was surrounded. That there were people that were better at it than I was. I was a good programmer, but not a great programmer, and I wanted to spend a little bit more time with people. And so, and also, I think I did just have this drive to be independent. And I got it in. Somehow, I got wind of the area of organizational development and coaching, and thought, well, I think that could be a good fit. And so I took the leap and just started coaching courses. Like there's actually a lot to learn about how to be a good coach, and started doing that, and then put out my shingle really early in terms of, well, like right away, basically, so putting myself out there, and also focusing on tech entrepreneurs, because that was the area that I was already familiar with
That's
and
kind of what you
enjoyed.
understood, right?
I understood that and loved the entrepreneurial realm, and could relate, and then it grew from there, and did all the things that people do when they're growing early business, right? Cold calling, cold in
Mhm.
mailing, all the things, lots of rejection and lots of s-
So
um,
roughly, what you might say, like what year this was when you were kind of just getting the ball rolling with
2009 is when I
oh,
brought on
no.
my first coaching client.
So you started off, you had a software development background. You put your name out there as offering business coaching services.
Yeah, yeah.
And then later, I'm assuming as you learned from the coaching experience, the HabitStack software started to become an idea, I'm guessing, to put more structure to that, or how'd that come to be?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. A lot of times you have these conversations with people like, what are you working on? What are the goals? What's the action required against that in order to keep that moving forward? And I found that I would get on the next call, and the client would be like, oh, right, right, right. I kind of, right, that I forgot about that. And sometimes even I would be working with a bunch of different people, and even I would kind of forget a little bit about what people were working on. And so we needed something that started out as a scripted Word doc, where basically that it would just break it down from the year to the quarter to the month to the week, and then it just
Okay.
iteration after iteration of that, so that people don't lose track of the things they've decided that are the most important, and
I
then
think
build
I can
habits.
relate to that. If I understand what you're describing, it's like that's that experience where you have a really, high energy, good planning or strategic meeting, and everyone seems like they know what they should be working on, and the goals and objectives seem kind of clear. And then you do a check in a month later. I'm like, what was that meeting about again? Can you
Yeah,
remind
yeah.
me? Is that kind of what you're describing?
Yeah, totally. And it's turned out that actually setting goals and executing goals is actually a very complex, deep topic that has turned out to keep me interested for the last 17 years. Like there's a lot to it. There's actually been 1,000 studies over the last 100 years on goal setting and execution.
Wow,
Yeah, yeah,
didn't know
there's
that.
it's the most well-researched intervention in one's motivation and behavior and performance ever. It is very well researched, but it's complicated to get right. It's really kind of captured my attention for a long time, and I still have a lot to learn. It's one of those things that people feel like they understand, and it's just a matter of doing it. But when you get into it, there's more to it, especially the execution side, like what you just described. It's so common, right? Yeah, we have this meeting. We said we're going to do this thing. We don't do it. And you can you can say, well, it's because I got busy or whatever. But in fact, the reasons why we don't do the things that we say we want to do are very complex and multifaceted, And so there's a lot to sort through. There's a lot of psychology and a lot of re-engineering of our context to make it more likely that we follow through on the things that are most important.
So I'm assuming you've read and studied some of these studies, some of this research, and baked it into, I'm guessing, your methodology and
Yeah,
software.
yeah.
But can you give me, selfishly, and maybe some of the people who listen to this, some of those golden nuggets, or like if you could distill your 17 years of experience down to like what's the essence of, what are some of the common reasons people set goals and abandon them, or set goals and can't achieve them? What are some of those pro sort of ninja level tips you've found along the way? I'm sure there's no, I always hate when people say tips and tricks, tips and tricks. You see that all
Mhm.
the time. Sign up for my newsletter, get tips and tricks. But is there anything you've learned along the way that's, easy to grasp onto that helps people increase the likelihood of following through on their goals and objectives? Or is it as simple? One thing I've learned, I'll share too, is setting more specific goals. Like obviously we've all heard of SMART goals, right? Don't ask me what the acronym stands for. I think it's specific, measurable, attainable, results driven, and time bound, I believe. Um,
Relevant, I think, relevant.
relevant
Well,
and time
actually,
bound. I was
there's
close.
about 75 different permutations of those
Of
acronyms, of
SMART,
those
right,
letters, yeah.
right. So I've heard one example of kind of what I'm looking for is, don't just set a goal, set a SMART goal. To make it smart, just takes it to the next level of like, how do I know I've achieved it? Put a number on it. And that's one thing I've heard consistently. But are there any other tips like that, that would help people, like I said, increase the likelihood of achieving their goals, or lessen the likelihood of abandoning them altogether, like we sometimes do as entrepreneurs when many of us have like that executive function disorder?
Mhm. A really easy way to increase the likelihood of success is just to not just set the goal, but just quickly bullet point out the plan. Like 5 to 10 bullet points. I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna need to do this. Like, just take some time. If say it's a quarterly goal that you're setting, just bullet points out, like, in 15 minutes. It's not like I'm not talking about Gantt charting the thing out, but just taking the time to sort out early what is going to be required will surface a bunch of things that you'll just otherwise discover in the final hour, and I should have just started with that because there was a lead time on that or whatever. And that was a dependency on an outside person. And so I should have just sent that email. If I would have just sent an email 3 weeks ago, I think it would have achieved this goal, but now I can't, so that kind of just the thing that is most fascinating to me, or that I would really recommend people to think through carefully, is just try not to commit unforced errors.
Unforced
Unforced errors.
errors.
Yeah.
Can you define that a little more? What's an unforced error?
So you make mistakes in sports all the time, right? Or like you shoot a shot and you don't make it, or you swing and you miss. Those aren't unforced errors. Like you're trying your best. That's competition, and you're not going to hit it every time. But an unforced error is like in basketball, you dribble it off your foot, and there was no defender around. It's a turnover. Or in baseball, the two outfielders don't communicate, and they run into each other and don't catch the ball. Like that's an unforced error. And so
I'm more
I
of a hockey
wondered,
guy for the record. I have heard the term unforced error before, but you don't
yeah,
hear
yeah.
that often in hockey. So appreciate the background. That does make perfect sense.
What's an unforced error in
You're
hockey?
skating with the puck in open ice, and you just kind of forget the puck and keep on skating.
Yeah,
People do that
yeah,
sometimes. They get ahead of themselves.
yeah. And so with goals, there's a lot of things that, one is what you just said. You missed the goal. Why did you miss the goal? Because you didn't make it specific. Like all you had to do was take 10 minutes and make it so it was concrete and numeric, and it would have made the difference because that clarifies, it scopes, okay, interesting. Or a lot of times it's communication, right? You and I are setting a goal, we're in the same company, and we both have different things in our mind, actually, that could have been clarified with 10 minutes of conversation where we make it super numeric and measurable. That's what it meant to you? Yeah. Oh, I didn't mean that to me. You know, that's an unforced error. If you don't clarify that, there was no need for that to be a miss. I mean, if we set a goal and the pandemic hits and we don't hit it, that's not an unforced error. Like that's an
Right.
externality
Yeah.
that we didn't, that those things happen too. But let's not miss things just because we just failed to do something, the basics, the fundamentals.
Yep. So a couple
So
things I heard is be specific, de-risk it by looking at the ways it could go wrong and addressing them up front. That's kind of like those unforced errors, right?
yeah, spend 10 minutes and bullet pointing out. So you're like, oh yeah, there's like
Bullet
this
it out.
leading thing. Just write down the thing that you need to do to move it forward and have a weekly meeting with people that hold you accountable, or at least that you just communicate. This is what I have determined I need to do this week. It's not even that people critique your decision about what you need to do this week or that micromanage what it is. It's just that it is written down. Yeah, I could talk about this for a long time. There's a lot of different things. Maybe I should write an article about that list of unforced errors that I've seen.
Go on. Yeah. You got all the time in the world.
I think that the kind of the meta unforced error is just not having an approach that you take as a leadership team. Specifically, I work mostly with leadership teams, founders and their
Right.
leadership teams.
Right.
So like not having a way that you manage strategy execution and just leaving it up to, well, we just like slam a little bit of strategy talk into our operations meeting.
A
Or
strategy for strategy.
yeah, I mean, or operationalizing how you work on
Right.
strategy. Yeah.
Well, I know, like we've talked about this before, but our agency uses the EOS model, which is getting pretty popular. I've heard of other models. I can't think of any off the top of my head. One of them is, it. What is it? The one that's
Scaling
popular,
up
like
is
scaling
metronome.
up. That's
Yeah.
the one
Yeah.
I was looking for. And I think that stuff helps a lot. But even since we've been doing EOS for, I want to say since 2018, we worked with a great implementer. He's hopefully going to be a guest someday on our show. It takes skill and practice, like even after you have your strategy for strategy, it still takes some practice to define, realistic goals in a way that you can really rally the team around. I've called them in the past like lazy goals. I think a lot of entrepreneurs and business leaders are guilty of creating easy goals. Like a lazy goal, what I mean by that is like we want to increase revenue next year by 40%. Is that even realistic, first of all? Secondly, how the hell are you going to do that? Can we maybe back that into which products or services have room to grow, which ones have capacity? If we do hit this goal, are we going to have to hire 7 people? I think to your point, they don't break it down enough, and they're just kind of sloppy with choosing those goals. So I think some of those tips you gave would be maybe the first few steps in getting smarter about that.
Yeah. That's such a great example. I think revenue goals are basically lazy is a good word, ineffective. Like because there's no strategic content to a revenue goal at all, right? Like because other than actually, there is one nice thing about revenue goals. It scopes the level of effort, the level of ambition, right? So if you say we want to go from 10 million a year to 10.2 million a year, It's like, okay, that's the level. That's what we're going for. If you say 10 million to 50 million, it's like, okay. So it kind of like, it helps you to scope
Yeah.
what kind of moves you're going to need to make. But it's lazy, like you said, because it's an abdication of the responsibility of the leader to facilitate a decision-making process to make strategic choices. And we're going to do that by going up market, going down market, by launching to something new. Or like, what is the way? What is the how? Like, you're right. Those are I'm much more interested in, and this is actually one thing that I've come to over the years is I tend to be much more interested in strategic projects with measurables about how they're going to impact the business. There's dispute about this. People have different opinions.
So you're saying
I
you break the goals down into strategic projects to get
Yeah.
there? So
Yeah, or
okay.
even that there could be the goal for a year is often to launch a the strategic thing is now exists when it didn't exist. And I would say, Chris, I'll be curious to hear what your thoughts are on this, but I think actually one of the most fundamental unforced errors is a lack of humility and a feeling like, look, I'm a professional. Just tell me big picture and I'll just naturally do the right things day by day, moment by moment, because I'm just that awesome. But in reality is a high performer is going to say like, yeah, no, that is not true. Like I'm prone to get distracted, or I'm not like 100% optimized as a leader and a performer. Of course, like if I can take myself from 85% dialed to 92% dialed, still not perfect, but that delta makes a big difference. And so kind of a feeling of like, I don't need a system. That's like a real clear unforced error to me.
Hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. I could see that with like a lot of owner operated, maybe dare I say like smaller shops, like 3 to 5 person kind of barely out of startup mode shops. I could maybe see that a little bit more. But when you said lack of humility, this might not be the same thing. In fact, it probably isn't. But it actually, the reason I smiled made me think of this happens in our agency sometimes, as much as I hate to admit, but we'll come up with like a goal or an objective, and you have a conversation with someone. Not to pick on anybody, we're all guilty of it. I'm guilty of it.
Sure.
I'll pick on myself, right? And then 2 or 3 weeks later, oh, haven't had the chance to make time for that yet. Haven't got that started. And then the person who's managing the project, or which might not be me, like it's weird in a small business. Sometimes you're reporting to me, sometimes I'm reporting to you, and I'm like, you're dependent on me for this project, but I own the company, but I'm also part of the team. That hierarchy kind of shifts across these different initiatives. And they'll come back and say like, hey, this, you said you're going to do this and you haven't got started on it. And then that person's attitude, which is sometimes my attitude or the project leader's attitude, is like, I shouldn't have to keep repeating myself. You're an adult.
Uh,
I asked you to do this. Why isn't this moving? And I frequently find myself kind of saying like, yes, they're adults, but they're busy. They're managing 50
right.
different projects. You still have to check in with them. And I don't think that's so much a lack of humility, to your point, but that's where my mind went, was not necessarily a lack of humility on your own part, but almost a lack of humility about your coworkers. We're like, they're an adult. I asked them to do it. Why isn't it done? Right.
Hmm.
And,
Hmm.
and that's just the nature of managing people, I think, is you have to follow through. You have to do those check-ins. You have to look at the end goal, right? And then like, what are the checkpoints to get there? Let's schedule them. We started a process we call them pre-mortems. So obviously you've heard of like a post-mortem of
Hmm.
like after a project's done, you dissect it and talk about what went right, what went wrong. We started doing what we're calling pre-mortems, where before the halfway mark, even we might look at like, how's it going? Where's it off track? Where could it get further off track? How do we get it back on track?
Hmm.
And that's been somewhat helpful, I think.
Hmm.
To get more directly to your question though about lack of humility, I could definitely see that. I think my spin on it, where my mind went, was a little bit different though.
Yeah. No, but you're right. Like there's a lot of times where founders are kind of frustrated because they feel like, well, I mentioned the priority. So why isn't it just happening? I mentioned it. I mentioned the
Right.
priority.
Yeah.
It's because, I want to treat them as adults and professionals
Right.
or whatever, right? But without recognizing like they need help. They need
Right.
guidance and
It's like
support and
different ends of a
check-ins.
bad boss spectrum, right? There's the ones who hover and micromanage you,
Yeah.
and then there's the ones who think they could just bang their fist on the desk every so often and yell real loud, and then that's the last time they'll ever have to say it.
Yeah, and I think this is the recognition that founders go through is when they're small, when the company is small and they're kind of like directly their fingers are in all the kind of the end results that are being generated. That's one thing, but then as the eventually that becomes untenable and they need to bring in a layer of management, senior leaders, and suddenly they have a leadership team. The way you manage the leadership team is there's a learning curve, right? That's different from how you manage an individual contributor, but it's not so different where you're just like, well, I mean, I hired a marketing leader, so that's it. It's now their job
I
to
never
do.
have to worry about marketing again.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And so it is actually this line to walk or like a balance of how you effectively lead through people as opposed to doing the management directly. And that's, I think, a big part of well, that's a big part of what the HabitStack methodology is, and EOS is like this as well. Essentially, what does it look like to hold the balance between autonomy and accountability,
That's
and how do you
interesting.
set people up for success without, you can't be overbearing. There has to be space and autonomy, but also they need you. And a lot of times, I talk to people. I hear from the teams like, man, I wish I had a lot more support, a lot more direction. I wish I had more time. I wish I had more feedback. It is not micromanagement is often not the problem.
Hmm. So how do you find that? Is it different for every company? Finding that balance point between, I think you said autonomy and accountability. That was fascinating to me. Is it unique to each individual team? It seems like the type of thing where there's more art than science involved, right? Like, if you start working with a new team, let's say it's a 5-person leadership team, which is probably typical size for a slightly bigger company. Let's say it's a 50-person company with a 5-person leadership team. When you come in and start working with that team, what are some of the things you're looking for to kind of determine like where if those kind of balance points are in the right place between the leader empowering the team and giving them autonomy versus holding them accountable? Which I mean, in a perfect world, you do both, right? They have autonomy and you're holding them accountable. But how do you balance that, especially with a new group that you're working
And how do you hold somebody accountable in a wild and woolly world, right? Like, I mean, we gave the example of the pandemic, right? Like you had goals, you didn't meet them well because things happened in the world. Autonomy looks like deciding on a weekly basis what you're going to do to move something forward. Accountability looks like ensuring that a decision has been made. This is actually a big part of it. Is you can't really hold leaders accountable to exactly what happens because the nature of strategic work is there's a lot of unknowns. But what you can hold people accountable to is engaging with a process that is likely to generate good results over time, even if we can't say exactly what and when. So it's like you can hold somebody on a team accountable, in sports, to coming to practice, being dressed and ready to play, playing the plays that you practiced in practice in the games. Like you can hold people accountable to that. You can't hold somebody accountable to making the 3-pointer that they shot just now because that's by definition a probabilistic thing. And so again, it comes down to having a system that you can hold people accountable to, using the system, and then that you all agree, that you all believe overall will increase our chances of success.
with? I
This
like
is, I
that.
think, one of the driving challenges for many founders, especially when they're just getting into wanting to improve their management of their leadership team, is what am I allowed to be firm on, and what is kind of like unreasonable for me? Like where do I provide latitude, and where do I say like, no, this has to be
Yeah.
the
Well,
case?
those were great examples of autonomy versus accountability. And it almost sounds like you want to coach autonomy and encourage accountability, which is counterintuitive. That's almost what I heard. Give them those opportunities to, not necessarily telling you which decision to make, but like I just want you to make a decision, right? That's where you have the autonomy. Whereas the accountability is, it might not have been the right decision. What did you learn? Not necessarily like time to punish you for not making the right decision.
Mhm, mhm, mhm. Yeah, one question I like to ask after like during a reflection period after a quarter has ended, is if there's a miss, right? We didn't hit this goal. Was that because of bad luck, bad planning, or bad execution.
I would imagine that if especially if their fingerprints are on execution, that's never gonna be the first one they choose.
Yeah, it's
They're
bad luck, right?
probably
Like,
gonna lean towards bad luck or bad
yeah, well,
ex
I
or
mean,
bad planning.
this happened and that happened outside, and the person didn't, people didn't get back to me, whatever. Like, this is our natural human tendency, is to say, like, well, I mean, it wasn't me, essentially, which of course is the least interesting answer, because partly because it's always the answer. There's always an element of bad luck of why we didn't achieve something. It's kind of like if you're asking a marathon runner who didn't win the race. Like, well, what happened? Why didn't you win the race? Like, well, I was doing good the first little while, and then partway through, like, gravity started really weighing me down. That's why I lost. I mean, like, no, come on. The headwinds are just gravity. Like, we know that stuff's going to happen, even if we don't know exactly what it is. So it's the least interesting part of it. What's interesting is even if it is 90%, there's something big happened, and 90% of it is we got schwacked with some bad luck. What Surely there's something. There's something I could have planned it out a little better. I could have bullet pointed it out sooner and caught that thing and got started earlier. Or in execution wise, you know what? There was in the middle of the quarter, I got real busy, and I just was like ticking the boxes in terms of my weekly planning, and I should have just spent an extra 10 minutes to actually think about it a little more deeply, or something, right? Isn't there something, that is in the other categories? Why am I bringing that all up? Okay, because that's what we can hold people accountable to, is answering those questions. For example, at least just answering those questions and learning from whatever happened, not just barreling through like, oh, oops, dang it, shucks, didn't hit the quarterly goal, but we were busy, and so let's just roll it forward, right? You can hold ourselves accountable to doing a better job of at least getting some value out of whatever happened.
What are some of the common mistakes or misunderstandings you see? Maybe we could talk a little bit about common mistakes or misunderstandings with actually setting the goals themselves, but also, um, especially for leaders, I know a lot of leaders struggle with this, holding people accountable. So what are some common mistakes and misunderstandings with goal setting and holding others accountable?
When I read the research on goal setting, like we referenced before, one of the most interesting things, this idea that you have to let people come up with their own goals, and it's not really true. When you present them with a goal, propose a goal, why don't you do this? This is what I think you should do. They need to understand it and believe in it. And collaborating with and collaborating with or coming up with it on their own doesn't hurt it, but it's not like a given that they need. It's fine to come up with goals for your team. And actually, a lot of times it saves a tremendous amount of time because the team is like, I'm supposed to set my own, I'm a marketing person, or I'm an engineering or whatever, and I'm supposed to set some goals. And okay, I can make some stuff up, but it's feels like I'm guessing about what's in the CEO's mind. And he's going to come back to me like, no, actually, no, that's not what I want. Well, why don't you just tell me more clearly? Like, give me some parameters then. And so that's one mistake, is a feeling
Why'd you
like,
make me
ooh,
think if you knew the answer the whole time?
yeah, that's right. So that's one thing, is I think just take some pressure off, or it's okay. And many times it's very efficient and a relief for everybody if just you can write other people's goals for them. It's all right. As long as they have a chance to give you feedback, and you got to make sure that they actually buy into it and want to do it. But
So maybe create the goals for them and then sit them down and say, "Do you think this is realistic?
yeah, yeah,
Is this something you can go after? And how will you go after it? How can I help you go after this goal?" Just talk through it, right?
yeah, yeah, exactly. So that's one thing that I thought was very interesting. They could not find. They've done research on this. They've done experiments, and they could not find strong evidence that coming up with your own goals is inherently better than the reverse.
What are some common mistakes or
Yeah.
misunderstandings when it comes to holding others accountable? And you
Mm,
could focus that around like when they miss a goal if you like, but just in general, I feel like a lot of managers, especially self-made entrepreneurs, founders, that sort of thing, they don't necessarily go through like I was in the military, right? Never went to NCO school. I got out just before getting promoted to sergeant. But they teach that, right? Like they teach leadership. There's a lot of small businesses, they don't have a leadership development program. So they've never been told how to hold someone else accountable. So what are the common mistakes that you see or advice to help someone feel more comfortable holding someone else accountable when they may have missed a goal or an objective?
Usually, I mean, the people that I talk to err on the side of too little accountability. They're worried, they have in mind, they don't wanna be they wanna be liked. They don't wanna be a jerk, but, they are actually frustrated. See,
Right.
in their heart, they're ticked off that things aren't moving faster, or they're kinda disappointed at least. Maybe ticked off is too strong.
I'll give you the first objection that comes to mind, and this was a really big one about 4 years ago
Yeah, okay.
during the Great Resignation. If I'm too hard on my people, they'll quit.
Right,
They'll go
right,
somewhere else. They won't
right.
like me. They won't want to work here. They'll start interviewing quietly. They'll quiet quit.
Well, Chris, let me ask you this. When somebody expects a lot from you and gives you clear feedback and it says, "I think you can do better," how do you feel? How do you respond to that?
I think the first the systems check, right? Like that happens. It's almost like you're climbing a tree and you fall out of it. The first thing you do is you do that thing like, am I okay? Is my arm broke? No. Is my
Right,
leg broke?
right,
No.
right.
Is my pride hurt? Yes. Did it
Yes,
knock the
yeah,
wind out of me? Yes. So you do that quick little function check. But at least the way my brain works, you talked a little bit ago about luck as a circumstance. I forget what movie it is with Mel Gibson where he says, I make my own luck. He says it like 20 times throughout the movie. I always like that quote. I feel like if you make a good plan and you get after it and you miss, sometimes what you learn and if you position it correctly from missing can be even better than if you were successful, right? I'm already aiming for like how I'm going to get back on course, right? Like what am I going to do to fix this? How are we going to set a more realistic goal next time? I start to walk it back a little bit, and that's a skill. I think you learn that with some maturity and after taking some lumps in business, we all have, right? Like if you've been doing it long enough, especially in the marketing world, right? Like because sometimes we have clients, back to what you said about planning, they come to us and they say like, we want to grow by 50% next year. And we start to kind of beat that up, probably more than some agencies would. You realize if you do grow by that much, you're going to have to potentially hire people, build an addition on the warehouse. Are you prepared to do all that? Have you thought that through? And you can start to poke some holes, right? And see how realistic that is. But I guess to answer your question more directly, if a client were to come to us, in my case, it's usually everyone says you don't have a boss because you own the business. No, I have like 700 bosses, and they're
yeah,
called
exactly.
clients. They come to us, and sometimes you don't hit a goal or objective, and I think you start from the top down. Was the goal realistic? Did we plan properly? Where did we miss? And those little misses add up to be big misses.
Yeah,
What did we learn? And are we going to set another goal together, or is this the end of the road? Sometimes it's the end of the road. And if that's the case, can you exit gracefully without burning the bridge?
yeah,
That's kind of where my mind goes.
yeah, and so maybe to summarize, big picture is you rise. You rise to the challenge. And so I think that's one answer is that if somebody quits because you were honest about a miss with them, they're probably not a high performer. High performers, they might get pissed off and that'll translate into them achieving, right?
Well, I
So
think that's where you build trust too. Like some of our best
totally.
clients, they come out of the gate swinging, and we get after it, and we're not quite there, and we realize there's some other foundational work that needs to be done. There's usually an answer for why we
See
missed, and
that?
I
There's
guess
an
that's
answer.
my point. I almost say it's a mantra. We don't have it like up on the wall here anywhere, but I say this all the time. My team repeats it. We say it to clients. We either win or we learn. So when we miss, we try to learn, like break it down, do those pre-mortems and post-mortems and get like really detailed, like why did we miss? Like how
Yeah,
do we make sure
totally.
that doesn't happen again? How do we improve next time?
Yeah, I think so. That's one thing is just have faith that high performers will be okay when you share with them that there was a miss. The other thing is, I think it's important for people to switch gears. So what they imagine when they holding people accountable, when they hear those words, it's kind of like wagging their finger and saying you failed to hit that goal and you suck. You're a bad person, And I know that that's not literally what anybody does or thinks, but that's kind of what they are worried they'll be perceived as doing. And so to think about accountability, I like to think about accountability in terms of accounting. You have accountants, and what do? They just make sure that it's clear where the money went and what happened. They can recount what happened financially and answer your questions. And
Hmm.
this is very similar. This is where we want to go with accountability around goals and other things is just tell me just exactly what happened. What was the goal? What actually happened? Why did that happen? Like you just want to be answer those questions. So holding somebody accountable is just requiring them to recount play by play without pulling any punches. And 95% of the time, that's all you got to do. That's enough. You don't have to, there's no emotionality. There's nothing over and above. You don't even have to comment on like, I need you to do better. You don't even have to say that. Just require the recounting or the accounting of what happened, and that's enough. That is a good starting point for leaders, just to focus on giving people the tools, requiring people to make that accounting. But of course, in order to do that, they have to require that the things that they're asking people to do are super measurable and clear, and that there's a mechanism for uh,
Yeah.
your delegation that way in order to have those conversations.
You remind me, I have to dig here in my drawer for a second. Hopefully it's not too noisy as I dig around. If I could find what I think I'm looking.
Oh, we're going under the drawer organizer. That's always
Yeah, I
for me,
saw
that's always like the special stuffs down there.
it is special stuff. This is where I hide my favorite little things. I might not be able to find it. Darn it. It was a great speaker I saw a few years ago. It's in this junk drawer somewhere. I'm not going to find it on the spot here for you, but and the short version was I wish I could credit him because it was a good workshop that we did, but there's essentially like the 6 degrees of why, like on why you missed. That was kind of the gist of it. And then what are you going to do to kind of get it back on track? But he had it distilled to a nice little system of questions to ask that I'll definitely butcher if I try to go from memory and not find the damn card that's in my desk drawer somewhere.
Yeah, so that's a
So
great
if
example.
I
That is
if
exactly
I
what I'm
find
talking
that,
about, Chris.
I can, yeah, it's
Accountability
what you
just
reminded me of.
means doing
Yeah,
this process. That's all that's accountability, like having
right.
the postmortem. Yeah, that's if somebody's struggling with accountability, just do that part, and that'll take care of the vast majority of it.
The 6 degrees of why exercise is always fun.
Mhm.
But that was a great answer. I think we have a few minutes left. Why don't you give us the elevator pitch for HabitStack and what you spend your days and nights doing these days? And tell us a little bit more about your program, the software that you built, and the business. And I don't think we got a chance to get very deep into it, but how have you built and grown this business? The concept of our show, Nice Doing Business with You, is how do you get customers, keep them coming back, keep them sticky, keep them loyal. So if you could speak to that a little bit in these last few minutes, kind of what you do and how you've grown it and who's a good fit for you and how you've found customers and grown this business, I think that would be a good cherry on top.
I would say one of the things that's worked really well for HabitStack is this combination of the human and the technical, right? Like, so the fact that we're marrying the two, there's lots of options that are kind of like, here's some software. It's really hard to be accountable to software alone. We all have, or many of us have downloaded a habit tracking app, and it turns out that it's not just a tracking problem. I used to think that actually, that if we could just make everything really clear, then people would do the right things, but it's not, or I would do the right things. It's not actually just that simple. There's the human connection. We're hardwired to respond to other humans. And so that's part of it. But of course, if you have if just the human element, just the coaching or facilitation, I do a lot of like weekly strategy execution facilitation for clients, like every week, in day out, like it's going to happen. Why? Because somebody is from the outside is paid to come here and have us talk about this and not about the client or that is upset, or not about the operational minutia. Scott's here, and so it's clearly only about one thing, right? This is one of the tips I would say. You
Force you to
have to
work on
have
the business.
Yeah, you have to have a weekly meeting that is sacred, where you work on strategic work. If you mix it, it's not going to work. If you mix it with operations, or you mix it with another meeting, you have to be really disciplined. Like, we only talk about this bigger picture strategic work. It is just too hard, because it is too hard to combine them and stay disciplined. So that would be one takeaway that listeners could do. Just, if you're not doing that, do that right away. Have a weekly meeting that's only about working on the business, only about the strategic stuff. And, it does make a big difference to have an outside facilitator, whether me or somebody else. An outside facilitator makes a big difference. You have an implementer for EOS, same thing. Although I don't know if he meets with that regularly, but somebody at least internally who's good at running meetings, who's good at
Well, it's definitely a skill. Yeah.
yeah. That's part of what HabitStack, I think, has worked really well for us is the fact that it's both things. Because if it's only the human element, you get into kind of like being an aha junkie. Like maybe I shared an insight and like, oh, that's kind of interesting. Or framework junkie. Like here's another framework. Here's another thing that we can way to think about how to prioritize or whatever. And as opposed to just kind of the hard work of being disciplined and staying with it. So that combination, I think, has really helped us serve clients well, and we have very loyal long-term clients, I think, for that reason, right? And so in terms of growing it,
Yeah. How have you found them, and how have they found you over the last 16 years?
yeah. A lot of it, as you can imagine, is referrals. That happens a lot. But especially in the early days, I did the cold calling and in-mailing thing. It's funny, people say, it's not worth doing cold calling anymore. And the problem with cold calling is that it actually still does work, even though it's
That's
hard.
the problem with it?
That's the problem with it. Well, the reason I say that is I forced myself to do cold calling early on, and I was so disappointed when it worked because it meant that I had to keep going. It would have been better in many ways if it didn't work because I didn't like doing it. Anyway,
Yeah,
that was
I'm a
early
fan of
days.
laser targeted cold.
Yeah, you have to do it. You have to do it right, and etc. But it's a lot of times what people mean when they say that something doesn't work is they mean that it's hard.
Yeah. And referrals, I think you mentioned it, they're always the best. When you get a
Yeah.
referral, it's like the conversation just starts at 25 miles per hour instead of 0.
Yeah, so those have been some of the key things. Speaking is always a good way to generate business. So those are some of the things we did to grow.
Okay. And then the elevator pitch for HabitStack, it's a combination of software to hold people accountable and chart kind of their goals and progress, and then also some coaching where the people element comes in to facilitate those meetings. Is this a good overview?
Yeah. And it's particularly good for founders who are building an effective leadership team, right? Like where it's kind of like a newish thing to have a team and to be accomplishing things through others as opposed to directly. That, like I talked about earlier, like that's a different beast, a different animal. You really need, there's financial management, there's engineering management, there's all kinds of like different areas of management. Strategy execution management is its own area with its own expertise, its own skill set and own methodology. And so if somebody's like, yeah, I think maybe I need to get better at strategy execution management, that's what HabitStack is.
So who's a perfect fit for you? Is it more specific than that? Like I think what you described is a founder who's just growing into having some mid-level managers or top-level managers. Any niches or industries that you focus on, or anything more refined than that, or is it really more based on the team structure and size, kind of turning the corner from sort of owner-operated to having an actual management team?
Yeah, it tips over a lot of times at like the 15 to 20 to 30 people mark. Somewhere in there, you're going to have to tip over and you can't be as involved. So there's a size element to it usually, although sometimes there's departments, right? A department is going through a similar kind of metamorphosis, but there's that. And I do still work primarily a lot of SaaS companies, a lot of
Some
software
tech.
companies,
Okay.
some financial services and whatnot, but the principles are not really specific to any industry. That's kind of more of an artifact of my own background.
Right. That's the area, that's your area of expertise. All right, Scott, thanks for being here. Everyone can learn more about Scott and his business at habitstack.com. You can check out our show notes today. We'll have a summary of what we talked about in the description. If you enjoyed the show, would love it if you would tell a friend or subscribe. Scott, thanks for joining the Nice Doing Business with You podcast. I'm 100% sure we will be talking again soon.
Chris, it's been a pleasure. I always like connecting with you. I believe in what you're up to, and yeah, hope to talk to you soon.
Thanks, Scott.